That's right. I think we should volunteer.
Yeah, rule 4.
Yeah, the question would be in the rules. I guess this state, this state can go second GAM. This state can have two characteristics.
That's not gonna be long.
Taking over Grant's job in Leeds.
Who's Grant?
Who's
I've never seen it.
Hey, I was in the top 200 and I didn't even get an interview.
For what?
For this job.
Just,
For that
I just,
job?
yeah, that's what I mean.
Tom.
When you get to the definition,
He was our number one choice.
that's what the A and Bs are.
Oh, my word.
You get to the definition.
Did a pretty good job now.
You understand that?
No, and I tabbed it. You're saying.
Yeah, and then on my other one.
I changed the club and you changed the
Yeah,
character.
definitely.
He's gonna let
you
change
the
You're
changing the law.
Yeah, I talked to
Yeah.
What a job.
Just as a.
Bob Brady.
Yeah, no, I haven't met you.
Whose performance
He's
characteristics.
gonna work for
That's
us.
the key.
It's so solid.
I know.
He or she deliberately
We did
changes
11 days in
things
Ireland.
around.
Even on the first
I agree with you. I agree with
See, then if you look a little further, by using adjustable features,
We're supposed to make this thing easier for us, right?
I know.
see, now here it explains a little more.
I know.
Yeah.
The only thing I didn't figure
And
out.
so I said,
related to the second
I was
part.
there for
Well,
2
that's
weeks.
part of it. That's
Well, I
bullet.
played all around.
They should have it in
Then
a second.
you get, you don't see,
performance.
Once
you
you
know
write a
you're there,
letter to
but
the
you look at it, this
USDA,
doesn't look any different.
in probably in 4 years,
Except there's no tree.
they'll change it.
You're right with
See
the
some
bullets.
points.
Yeah, like
You
setting
have to
up
almost look at the bullets,
Yeah, yeah.
just to see
Then it reviews.
whether you're right.
Down at Grand Cypress down in Orlando.
Some of
they
those
got a
ones
thing
on
called-
Facebook,
they got a thing called
they're really
Riddles.
silly.
It's very, very smart.
Yeah.
1 in
Yeah.
18.
You know, they
Well,
put each other in the
well, they
rules.
kind of use the thing.
Oh, yeah, it does. It's good.
Don't forget, these are people ready for long.
Yeah, I know, I have it over.
Because actually, I guess there's some guys out there that actually have
And
some.
so I was,
Um,
still,
Yep.
Because they'll send it in like Japanese.
So
And then
we
he has
played a
to,
little
I had to get my son-in-law over.
he has to do these
When
presentations.
we were on the course.
And that can get shit.
Curtis got
Yes,
it.
sometimes.
Oh, I can't even read the
Yeah,
English.
so we were going in and they were going out. So I hit my ball in the
Google
knee,
Translate.
so
I had to do some correspondence.
They played first because I had to play away.
Really?
Yeah.
Some of the stuff I heard people who played that before said the greens
No.
are kind of slow compared to what it was.
Well, you
Yeah,
can
that's true.
get it,
Hit
but
it.
You have to whack it.
You gotta study it.
And especially like if you're 40 yards away and you're still out of green.
Yeah.
Your rangefinder out of the green.
How was that to it?
I just met him.
It was.
Hi, my name is Jim.
Hey, Jim,
No.
Bob Frazier,
Bob Frazier.
Like
Yeah,
me.
I'm pretty.
Jack. Mike.
The one I went to best.
yeah. Especially,
That's why.
when you hear anything more
Golfers
about the
who've been
meeting,
over there several times. They played most of the golf courses. And they said without a doubt their favorite golf course over there was up and out.
No,
That's what they
well, that was,
said.
I played before Trump.
Is that where the sheep were out there?
Hey, Bob,
Is that where the sheep were out there?
have you,
They were, my guy for
No.
okay, are you planning to?
They're trying to keep
Eventually.
Actually, there was sheep all over.
And what I'm gonna
You
do
see
is
that?
I'll make up a,
Oh, yeah, St. Andrews.
First and 10th, yeah, there was in there, chopping away while you're.
I'll make up a card sign.
St. Andrews was,
Okay.
interesting when the guy yells, there's a pathway on number 1 to the ground. Did you?
You made one up for me last year.
Oh, did you have, you have it already?
Yeah, I had one.
Oh, then I'm-
I still got it. You don't have to bother.
I was looking. And we did.
Yeah, I did, I do most of the stuff up north. I live on Lake Bel Air, so I was down for grandkids. And I thought, well, I'll go meet the guys from Detroit. Well, a couple of people I know,
So have you been at the Bel Air bar?
but yeah, so long. Put it this way: the Bel Air bar used to be really a good greasy burger, and now it's not. You know, it's more yuppie.
Oh, is that right?
Oh yeah, the Bel Air.
This is a dive bar when I was there.
Well, that's yeah. The NASCAR would run, and the spike tooth ladies were there.
Oh, you definitely doing tattoos and teeth, right?
Correct. We've had a place up there for 40 years.
Okay.
We were at Shanny for, and then I bought a place on the lake when I retired. Weisskopf.
Yeah.
It's more of a resort course.
Okay. It's not as good as the Palmer course.
No, the green complexes and you know, it's a really nice resort course. Cedar River. When you think about the old Deskin course, you think about going east up over that ridge line, back towards the Cedar River. It's I enjoy playing it, but it's not. Yeah, I played a lot. Yes. And really good green complexes too.
Isn't there up there another place still a little bit further north, Kingsman or something like that?
Oh, Kingswood Club. That's south of Traverse City. It's actually I played it last year.
How far north is that from where you are?
Oh God, it's a good hour and 10 minutes. So when you go down to where the Menards is in Traverse City, it's south of there. Good 20 minutes drive. Really, that's play that one. It's a great course. That is a really, that's like Crystal. Yeah. The superintendent of schools there, I do a lot of school stuff. And we did the accreditation year. The superintendent was somebody I knew from Grand Blanc a lot of years ago. And we played. No, I'm retired.
Pretty cool place.
I was a chemist.
I've played a couple.
No, I worked for Mott Community College.
Body hold up?
Almost.
Yep.
I didn't play.
How'd they do?
I had a few good holes.
Sure.
You know, I won skins 3 days. 4 days. I won something. But I paid my $20 into the game and I never wanted to do the team game. But I won skins.
Okay. So we
The old coach there,
And
he's a pretty good coach.
if I can find the picture quickly.
Yeah. Yeah, that guy was up for the coaching job at Central. I don't know. This is yeah. And he's a Central grad and hired somebody else. And he, you know, he's been there forever now. He does a nice job with it.
That was the house.
Oh, wow. Okay, nice.
I go through it all the time when it's
Oh, that was I got a friend that
I haven't played there in about 3 years. That's a nice track too. Yeah.
That's Eric sitting at.
It is tricky.
Arnold's desk. And that's his golf bag. I have that replica bag in my basement.
Yeah.
That's me
Oh, nice.
sitting at Arnold's desk signing the guest.
All right.
So,
Guest list. Yeah.
yeah,
That's pretty cool.
pretty neat.
Yeah.
So Had a great time.
Uh-huh.
Oh, that's one of the.
Great memories.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, it's fun time down there. Yeah. Does Eric stay down there for the shows?
Yeah, he missed the first couple days, then he joined us, played with us, and then he ended up going up to the Villages and came back to the show, so he's at the show now.
Right.
And then they're flying out to Arizona, and so he's going out to Arizona with his lady friend. So,
Right. That's great.
How many years ago? Well, Mark Erickson. He really does. And,
I made those states. Well, let's see. Throwing goatee.
Don't tell me what I should be reading, tell me what I'm reading in the last 3 months.
I carry the single just back.
Every time I look at
We did that. Where you stand, where you put like that. It's got
Oh, yeah.
I emailed the guy, asked him if he was in session 2, which they had on YouTube, because they put it on. I never got texted Hartman to ask if he could. This is when they got us the information for session 1. The guy has.
Yeah, that was very ineffective.
He texted me, not hurting the guy.
That's like the first time I made myself flashcards. Yeah, I got it. I don't know what number. I think because that. It's like trying to figure out where it's gonna go. Yeah. I haven't been. I want to know the rules enough to play how to play. But I'm not if I start to do,
I carry.
That's right.
I don't need this for.
It's like we're going over. I don't in this pocket. I got a bunch of
I can relate to that. I can relate to that. I can't remember shit anymore, and so I want to do it, but I can't work that hard. I don't want to study that hard.
Did you just say you're from?
Pardon?
Did you just say where you were from?
No,
No.
I belong to Lakeland.
Oh, no, I was just looking.
No.
So you guys mispronounce water.
Oh, yeah.
You mispronounce tornado.
Except you're doing it.
I've been 35 years here.
I knew where he was from to begin with. Yeah, he sounds just like O'Driscoll. He's a friend up in Shanty that I play golf with all the time. He grew up in Philly. I mean, You started talking. I thought, God, he sounds like O'Driscoll.
And he doesn't get it near as much as I get, but they never say that, but I mean, they still, when I first moved to Michigan.
Oh, yeah.
I said,
You would have heard it.
Canadian, are they Canadian?
Eh?
I don't know for sure.
Yeah, that's your answer.
It's kind of one of those things where is it
DW,
Yes, sir.
look at it, one of the rules there, and it seems to be conflicting. My wife, when she plays golf,
18.10.
she only drinks, and she likes to put her down.
right.
Yeah.
So I think it probably is going to tell.
Leave it there, and walk around, and never move it. That
It's definitely, that was,
Yeah, no,
that was not,
Yeah.
that was a good shot. But
Right.
it's definitely.
I don't think it is.
Right.
Are you on that,
Yes.
Facebook page?
Yeah.
They actually had a discussion on that.
So they were doing a standing putt.
Yeah, and you're talking about laying it down?
No, I just, it's like, I get there and I'm looking and I do this, get it lined up, but I'm down here like this. Then I line up and then I cut around and I.
Yeah, you can do that.
That's what I'm saying. He's driving me nuts, saying you're not.
He's doing it
Hey,
Let me break that down.
you know what? I don't care if I wear the
God, so bad. Yeah, I have to start.
You play with the neighbors?
Yeah.
You never know what's going to happen.
Oh, yeah, it's going to Philadelphia now.
There we go.
No filters. No
This is just the rule. This is right here. Well, you got one more page.
Yeah, I know.
Right. So it's just.
Supposed to be, the way they do it is like if you press run or something there, instead of being on the outside.
These three go together.
So the inside is actually pressing
Okay.
against the.
This is the set that I.
Exactly right.
What you can is,
Right.
you just need,
There is.
this is good. You want-
Oh, it's like, when I had this game,
No, well, yeah, we will.
Do one, no, gotta do one book. You gotta do both books.
You still have to find it.
I don't have.
Here. Where's the set copy? You're good. You got two books.
All right.
Now you have two books. Frank's got two books. These are for, I got one more set, but I've already given them away.
Awesome.
So this is, and it's the 13 days.
And if they don't do it, the next check, they'll tell you.
The one he just gave you has one cap missing on it. What's the half? Where he took that from you, maybe. Okay, yeah. See, I've got that in my book because he showed me how to do it. I didn't realize that this is the sticky part up here that sticks out of the book, and this folds over so you see from either direction. Okay, so you need to. I'll have this with me next week.
I bought some tabs that I was gonna write on. So
Okay. Well, these are supposed to be part of.
I know it. This will save me tons of. Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, because to me, if somebody stepped on it. That's not an actual.
These guys.
That's going to be all the more like, oh yeah.
I know, we have had something that I missed.
Basically, what? That's what I've been doing the last 5 years. I just carry shit.
Oh, one of those. Hard USA.
Listen,
You're gonna take the 80 down. Take the 101 down there.
feel like Lee.
Yeah.
It's like
For what?
We took it in December. Took it in December. We should take the 80 and the 100. But I'm gonna do, I'll do the 100 down in the new year.
So you take it as if they don't charge.
JW going, I'm going. I got 3 in my car.
Over stuff like that, like if they. Here,
20 second. 23rd.
I don't know if I can sit still.
And then the that's where you. He goes to it.
Oh, yeah.
He's.
I got it.
The first time I saw him.
Yeah, very
I
bad.
threw that
And she was in the.
Yeah, and I got a book. I looked at all this. You know.
I went to workshops. There's a.
Right.
That's why. The first thing.
Well, I tried to darken it.
Don't come up with what the heck it was.
So what?
Oh, I know.
I sat there and looked at some of those.
Until then. They made this thing that's very. Yes. Yeah.
Well, I said to somebody the other day, you have an embedded ball, You're in the rough. My boss this far.
Oh, yeah.
You get free relief.
Is there another?
Free relief. No, well, you get relief.
It's just a drawing.
And I said to somebody, we were talking about what we're doing. I said, you go tell the board that if they think this is going to be easy, tell them this is everybody in the board right now. So we're going to have a 1 hour, half-hour training session for mentally to tell everybody about the new rules.
What do you mean?
Which one?
I don't know. I was curious. Right. Well, it doesn't make sense to me because I would say yeah, we'll go over it. But. Well,
What am I explaining?
Yes, there is.
So I'm thinking, are they charging you?
But it's free relief from there.
What do you major change? But he's got a lot of these women.
But if you're in a place, you can't play it. You know? You can't play from there. Right.
That's a guy.
All right, we're gonna go ahead and get started here.
Good. Shut up.
Might be a domestic situation.
This is a lot better than a staff meeting at the college.
Reserve your judgment.
It's not done yet.
All right. Can you guys hear us on the Zoom? Yes.
The ocean better, but.
Yes.
All right. All right. So really quickly to get started today, we are going to go just clarify. I hope some of you got to see this drawing that I drew up just to clarify our discussion from the last week about when penalty areas and no play zones intersect, and some of the confusion that we had, and I think there's probably still confusion about it. But basically, we have three scenarios here. We have the first one is where the player's stance is interfered with by a no play zone outside of the penalty area. So in this case, they can take relief from that, but it has to be within the penalty area. All right, and then the second situation we have the no play zone that's within the penalty area, and then the ball is also in that penalty area. And in that case, the player has to take penalty relief. And then the final situation, we have the penalty area, and then the ball is outside of the no play zone in the penalty area, but then the player's stance or swing is interfered by the no play zone. And in that case, they can drop for free in the penalty area at point B here. Or they can obviously go in all cases, if the ball is inside the penalty area, then they can always go out of the penalty area for a one-stroke penalty. But the only time that they're required to is when the ball is in the penalty area, that they have to go out when we're talking about a no play zone. So sorry, let me re-say that because that was a little confusing there. But basically, the only difference between 2 and 3 here is that for 2 we have to come out because the ball is in that no play zone, whereas 3 the ball is not in the no play zone, but there's interference from the no play zone. And so that's why they have the option to drop where they don't have interference from the no play zone, but because their ball was not in the no play zone, they can still play from the penalty area in that case.
So, but according to him, if it's in the no play zone, if you could drop somewhere in the penalty area, why couldn't you do that?
So point 2.
Point 2.
Yeah,
right.
and so that to me, I also asked that question because to me that's not yeah, exactly. It's in this case you're allowed to drop,
Well, if
but
you're not going to get a penalty versus getting a penalty.
right. So but that's the way the rule is written.
So but the no play zone is technically a penalty area.
Correct.
Also. So you couldn't drop it outside of the penalty area without taking a penalty because it's called penalty. Okay, I got it now.
Correct.
How would you expect that the no play zone would be marked in example 2? 2 stakes or stakes?
So-
Stake all around?
So
How many
in
steps
this
you got in the car?
in this case, in point 2, you would the entire area would be marked as a no play zone.
Or identify.
Or
notice
identify.
the
Yeah,
competitor.
exactly. So I mean, you could use stakes. You could use.
The question more specifically so if you go to the lowest area of that no play zone, that
Right
corner
here.
there, would that have both hazard and no play zone stakes?
Well, no, because this part is no play zone. So you would have to either use blue stakes, let's just say blue stakes, and outline that in blue stakes, and then starting at this point, you would have a blue and a red, and then a blue and a red here, and the red would go all the way around.
But then
Might not have anything. It
Right,
might be a
exactly.
Flower bed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it might be on the nose to competitors. All flower beds are no play zones. If you're a trouble hole official and you're on hole 12 and that's hole 12, they're going to say to you, if the ball is in that flower bed, it's a no play zone. I think that's more likely than worrying about what color stakes there are.
So where I was going with that is there's no difference really between that one and the one above it, in that, so what if the hazard line went midpoint of that no play zone?
Well, I think that's what he's
I don't
saying.
know
This
if
is all hazard.
The difference
all.
between that and the number 1 example is in the number 1 example, the ball is not in the no.
No, I'm just saying
No, the ball
the
is.
way it's drawn.
Not the number
Correct.
Let's say that in number 1, the no play zone slides just a little bit into that penalty area. Then what's the difference?
Well, it all depends where the ball is, right? So.
No, I'm not talking specifically about your example. And
Right,
how to do it,
sure.
but If it touches it, which it would seem to be, then somebody's going to have to make a decision. Is it a number 1 situation or a number 2 example? Right? Because
Right.
One's in the penalty area, one's not, and without dual marking.
Well, that's the difference between in this example. This is a penalty area, so it's going to be where the ball last crossed the margin of the penalty area, right? This case, it's not in the penalty; it's in the no play zone, so you're going to have the nearest point of relief.
Correct.
Right?
No.
Number 2 just doesn't make any sense to me. Why wouldn't you? It doesn't make any sense that if it's a no play zone, you should get a penalty, even though, yes, technically it's inside the penalty area, but you don't have it marked as a penalty area. So it just is confusing. I think it's just
Well,
gonna be very.
it is a penalty area because when you identify a no play zone,
It has to be one or the other.
it has to be either abnormal ground condition or a penalty area.
So then, are they gonna tell you?
Yeah. So
They is we. And
yeah.
I guess I was thinking about the normal course.
So the the way to think about it, I guess that it's. I mean that two is maybe not the best example of a situation, but it just is basically saying that if in that case, because the no play zone is part of the penalty area and is defined as a penalty area as opposed to abnormal condition, that you have to come out.
Oh.
Again, you're coming out where it last crossed the margin and not the nearest relief.
Correct.
That's the difference between two and these other two. The other two are both nearest point of relief.
Correct. Yes, because the two that no play zone is defined as a penalty area. Yes. Mm-hmm.
So the sheet,
Kyle, I think Rule 17.1E.
example one, they'll say it's adjacent but not marked.
Sorry, hold on. Mick, can you say that again?
I think if you look at Rule 17.1E, it kind of explains exactly what you're trying to say.
All right.
I don't want to go that far ahead.
Page 150. Right.
Exactly.
So I think what as rules officials and we'll, I mean, obviously there's still some confusion about this. And it's not an easy thing to understand for sure. But I think one thing that we'll do as a committee, or that you as a rules official need to make sure, is that you know, if there is a no play zone out there, what part of the course is it? Is it either a penalty area or is it an abnormal course condition? Because that is going to determine how players take relief. And so most cases, it's going to be an abnormal course condition, because that's just the majority of what we see. Flower beds, bunkers that are under repair, that people don't want to play being from. Those are the ones that you're going to see. The ones that are typically in penalty areas are either wetlands that are protected by, that they don't want people going in there, or we talked about the situation with Gowney where you had the flower bed on 6, where the flower bed is before you get to the water. And so in those cases, we just have to figure out how we're going to define those. But we'll make sure to let to let the players know if this is going to be a penalty area or an abnormal course condition.
Yeah.
All right. All right, so I believe we left off here last week about the responsibilities of the player and opponents in terms of in a match here. So at any point in time, your opponent, you need to let them know how many strokes you've taken. That player has the right to know where you stand on the course. That includes penalty strokes as well. So if you can't provide that information, it says here that a player who fails to respond to the opponent's request is treated as giving the wrong number of strokes taken. So this is something that you have to do, and if you don't, then you're going to be, again, treated as giving the wrong number of strokes, which again is a penalty in match play. So the player does get the loss of hole or general penalty if they give the wrong number of strokes taken, unless the player corrects that mistake in time. So what that means is that during the play of the hole, you have to give that before the opponent makes another stroke or takes a similar action, such as conceding the player's next stroke or the hole. And so if you're out there and you say, okay, I've hit 5, and then you realize right before they're about to hit that you've hit 6 shots, that's your right to let them know. If you don't let them know before they hit that shot, then you're going to lose the hole there. Okay, and then if it happens after the hole, the player must give the right number of strokes taken, but before either player makes a stroke to begin another hole or takes similar actions such as conceding the next hole of the match. So same thing. If you thought the last hole was tied with 6s, and then you realize that you made a 7, you need to let that player know as soon as possible so that the match can be corrected and that we know where we stand. And then if it's the last hole of the match, you need to let that person know before the match is final. And so there's a slight change in terms of, and we'll see this in a couple of different rules today if we get to them. But it's a slight change in when you have to make that known, because previously it was when you walked off the green of the last hole. Now it's before the match is final. In this case, in other cases, it's going to be before you turn your scorecard in stroke play. So it's a little bit of a change where previously we had, as soon as you took one step off that putting green on your last hole of the round, timing was done. Now we have a little bit more time to get the situation correct. And we'll see that when we're playing wrong ball. That's another common situation that we see this happen. But as an exception, if we do give players wrong information, so I told the player that I made a 4 and the other player I was playing against made a 7, but I really made a 5, it doesn't matter because that didn't impact the match, right? So it's not always the case that there's going to be that general penalty, but as long as if it doesn't impact the match, then we're just going to carry on, no worries. Okay, and again, the same thing goes for penalties as well. So you need to let your penalty or your opponent know as soon as possible. And that, here's an example. I mean, it says as soon as reasonably possible, and taking into account how near the player is to the opponent or other practical factors. So if you're 50 yards on the other side of the hole and you get a penalty, you don't need to stop what you're doing and alert the other player. Or if they're way ahead because you were behind play or something like that, you just need to let them know as soon as it's reasonable. And we're not saying that you have to stop what you're doing and go let them know, but you need to tell them as soon as you can. And this requirement applies even if the player doesn't know the penalty, because at the end of the day, the players are responsible for knowing the penalties. And if you don't do that and correct your mistake before, again, the opponent makes another stroke or takes a similar action, concedes the next stroke, etc., you're going to get a loss of hole penalty for that. So if you took relief from a penalty area and you didn't tell your opponent and you just kept playing on, and you got to the green and your opponent asked, what are you line? And you say 5, and I say, oh yeah, I took a penalty stroke from that penalty area. At that point, it's going to be too late. You're going to lose the hole and go to the next hole. So the timing is important, not only when the strokes that you make, but also with the penalty strokes. And then an exception here, so no penalty when the opponent knew of the player's penalty. So if I, as the opponent, know that you had a penalty and I'm standing right next to you taking relief from the penalty area, you don't need to tell me that. I can see that with my own eyes. That's not the player's not going to get penalized for not saying something in that case. All right, and same kind of concept when we talked about strokes taken is just knowing where the match stands. So we need to know where the match stands, and the players in that match are obligated to know. So we have here, so let's say an example where the players mistakenly agree on a wrong match score. Let's just say they thought that it was 2 up, but really it was 1 up. If they can correct it before either player makes a stroke to begin another hole or before the match is final, But if it's not corrected in that time, then that wrong score becomes the actual score of the match. So if we think that the match is 2 up, and then 3 holes later someone does the math and says, hey, it was actually 1 up at that point. At that point, it doesn't matter. We're going to go with what was agreed upon at the end of that hole where it happened. And so, I mean, this is why when you're a referee for a match, we ask that you say the result of the match or the status of the match after each hole, so that if the players don't agree, they can say, hey, actually, you know what, Lee, it's all square right now. And this is just a check for you as a walking referee or a referee in any match play event to make sure that we know the status of the match. Okay, and then in this case here, we won't get into making a ruling in time or requesting a ruling. One change that you'll see in the rules when it comes to match play is that we no longer have the term making a claim. It's just requesting a ruling. And so that's going to apply for both stroke play and match play. But if a player does make a timely request for a ruling, so see that 20.1b, that's basically where it talks about when we used to understand it's making a claim. That's page 280, I believe, in the book. Big book, sorry.
There is no 280 in the rule.
Yeah.
Or the tiny book, either one.
But so sorry, when you make a timely request for ruling, it's found that the opponent either gave the wrong number of strokes or failed to tell the player about the penalty, the wrong match score must be corrected. So again, this is just an exception to that. We have a mechanism within the rules to allow for the situation to get righted, provided that one of these two things happen. And then these last couple things are just some statements about, you know, players being able to protect their own rights and interests because they're able to see what's going on in the match, and because it is an individual match, the players should have this right. So again, if the player knows or believes that the opponent has breached a rule, that's a penalty. The player can either choose to call it out or they can ignore it. It's up to the player. So if I'm playing against John and I see him, you know, take 3 club lengths from a cart path for relief, if I don't say anything, then I've just chosen to ignore that. But that doesn't mean that the next statement says it doesn't mean that we can just say, hey, we're gonna take 3 club lengths from the cart path all day. We can't agree to break a rule, but if I choose to ignore it in the match, it's okay. I don't have to call a penalty on it. But when I do ignore it, I can't go back after the fact and say, you know, hey, I thought I was going to drum this person in the match, and then they you know, started playing well, and I want to call them a penalty on the second hole when I chose to ignore it originally.
At what point has it been ignored?
So at what point has it been ignored? I mean, basically, as soon as I believe it's as soon as the hole is completed.
Or when he or she takes their next
It
stroke.
should be.
Stroke.
That's not
Let me see here. It'd be at Rule 21B.
Well, this says a decision can be made as if the player becomes aware of the facts before either player starts the final hole. Then can ask for a ruling still.
But I think there is a requirement of when you need to make that request.
Hey, Kyle.
Yeah, John.
Yeah, I can't find it right now, but I think they told us in class that they really didn't change the way that is managed, even though they changed the terminology. And I think it's if you tee off from the next hole, you can no longer request a ruling for something that you knew about before you teed off on the next hole.
All right, that's what I thought as well. Or if it's the last hole of the match, then that's probably changed a little bit now. But
it says when the player becomes aware of the facts, must be made before either player makes a stroke to begin another hole. But it doesn't say that becomes aware of the facts. It's on page 281, about halfway down the two thing, where the little arrow is. When player becomes aware of the facts before either player starts the final hole of the match. But when the player becomes aware of the facts, the ruling request must be made before either player makes a stroke to begin another hole.
Yeah. So that's our answer.
So even if it happened on the first hole, you don't become aware of it until the third hole.
So
you can still ask for a ruling.
So if let's just say that it happens, you're on the fifth hole and you see something, you have to request a ruling before you tee off on the sixth hole.
Right. But what if something happened on the fourth hole, and your opponent started talking about it, and you're saying, well, but that's a penalty, and then he says, well, I didn't think it was, and you're already teed off on
the last three bullet points cover that.
I don't think that's Tony's question.
The last three, all three of those things have to take place.
Your question was, when does the fact that you chose to ignore it become operative?
Yeah.
I mean, logically, wouldn't it be
from chose to
if the opponent takes their next stroke, then
you're aware of
because otherwise, I mean, you're entitled to know the status of the match and the status of the hole. I do something wrong. You don't say anything. I make my next stroke. To me, that logically would be the knife that cuts the continuum.
On the same
Because otherwise, I might have done something different if I knew that I had a penalty stroke or two.
But on the same token, if you become aware of it and you can't communicate with your opponent, let's say he's way the heck in the trees.
And that's the exception to the exception.
I don't know if you have the whole hole to make it a claim. I think you do. Right.
But I was talking a little bit more like they weren't sure it was a penalty, and then all of a sudden they realized it was.
Yeah.
A couple holes down,
Tony's
ruling on that.
That's just the fact that you've ignored it.
All three of those.
Yeah.
Just as long as you get tee off.
I still think that, I mean, I'll have to look into it more, but I still think it goes back to when that ruling is made in a timely manner. So you have, as we read in the book, you have until you tee off on the next hole to make that ruling request.
Or not.
No.
Or not make it. Yeah.
The question is, when does I'm not going to call my opponent on this. When does that become operative?
Right. Well, I don't know. We'll have to look, and I don't see anything in the interpretations, and I'll have to take a look and see if there's other things. But I think for now we have to go under the assumption unless we can find it.
Kyle, I thought somebody mentioned it. It's 20.1B2.
And the last 3 points on the bottom of that page, on page 281 in the big book. If the player requests a ruling about an earlier hole.
There's 3 interpretations there that tell you everything you want to know. Okay, how are you guys doing?
Yeah, but this isn't about requesting a ruling. It's about when does I'm going to waive this.
But I think you then infer that it is final.
Yeah, then as soon as they make their next shot, it seems like it.
Because this is how
you ignored it. If you intentionally ignored it, then once they make their next shot.
We'll find out the the answer for that because it is, Jim, as you're saying, it is a tad bit different because you're choosing to ignore it as opposed to requesting a ruling.
So the next page is the interpretation. Request for ruling must be made. I can read it. 282.
Right.
I think it has to do with intent.
We'll figure it out. We'll ask the USGA, or I'll do some more reading and figure it out. We're not gonna get caught up on this. Just keep going on. And we'll get back on that question. It's a good question, Tony. All right, and then this last point, as we were talking about, and looked at how that player does request a ruling, but there is a timing component. They have to do it in the correct time. And as John was saying, they haven't really changed how that claim procedure works. They just changed the wording that it's no longer making a claim; it's just requesting a ruling. But in terms of the areas where the timeliness and when certain things happen that the player didn't know about it, you can still change the outcome after the fact as well. Did you?
No.
Okay. It does. Okay.
Yeah, I think we'll have to say it's make, there's one that makes the stroke in the next hole.
Okay. Right. Okay. So that's interpretation.
20.1D 2/1 on page 282.
Okay. All right. So interpretation 21B 2/1 covers what the question that we were talking about, and does indicate that it would be the next hole. After you tee off in the next hole, that's when it's been ignored. All right, stroke play. So just again, these purpose statements. Stroke play has specific rules. Again, we're in stroke play. We're really concerned about making sure that we're protecting the field, and that because we have people playing against everyone in that field, and so there's certain things that we have to take into consideration to make sure that player teeing off at 8 a.m. has the same kind of playing conditions and/or rules that are being applied against the person that is going at 10 o'clock. And again, as we all know, that we have a scorecard that needs to get certified by the marker who is going to keep that player's score during the event. You don't really need to spend too much time on this. Just obviously the winner is the person who has the lowest number of strokes, and if it's a net tournament, the lowest net strokes. So in terms of a scorecard, for GAM events, we don't identify a specific marker. We just typically in the starters or at the starting hole, we just say switch cards. The committee can identify a specific marker if they choose to do so. But it really typically is just, send them around a circle, and that's kind of how we go about it. We do have some situations where the player's going to have multiple markers throughout the round. So if a player quits after 7 holes because of an injury, and we have that player that's leaving sign the card that they were keeping score on and then switch the cards within the groups. I know a lot of you have handled that out there on the course, but that is important that we do have someone leaving from a group that they do sign the card that they're keeping score, and that we get that card from them so that another person can continue to keep the score they were keeping. It's not required because someone might just leave the course, just not tell anyone, and they might take the card with them. We're not going to penalize the player who happened to have his card being kept by score being kept by that player. But it is helpful so that we can keep that card and have and transfer it so that this score continues to get kept. And then again, it's recommended, but at the end of each hole, the player should confirm. So should confirm with the player the number of strokes they had. So a lot of times, I mean, I see it. The players come in the scoring area and they've got 6 blank spots on their scorecard, and they're like, "Oh, what'd you get on?" It's like, could you just do it after each hole? But it's not. It's a should here, so you can see here it should confirm. It's not required that they do that. And then for all the events that we do ask that the gross score be on the card. So if it is a net tournament, we do ask players to put the gross score, and then we will apply the handicap. So always the gross score. All right, and then again, it's common that you have to have the player needs to sign it, and then any marker that needs to sign that card as well. So here's a nice picture that's in the rule book now. And typically, you can see here what the committee is responsible in blue, and then what the player in the marker are responsible. So as I think everyone knows, we're not responsible for the hole by hole, and the player is not responsible for the math. So if the player just puts scores 1 through 18 in there and doesn't put totals, that's fine. That's why we're there, is to add them up or to have the computer add them up. But you can see that a couple things that the player is responsible for is their handicap. So they need to check that and make sure it's accurate. And if they don't, there's ramifications for that, which we'll go over in a sec. And they also need to sign it. And then the player needs to make sure that those hole-by-hole scores are correct and that the marker does sign it. There's a few exceptions that the marker doesn't sign it, that the player is going to be okay. So again, this is just saying that we have the player checking each hole, and that the marker signs the scorecard. You must. A note here, you must not change a hole score entered by the marker except with the marker's agreement or the committee's approval. So this is something that's, I think, been an unwritten rule, but now it's actually in the rule where you have to have the marker's agreement or the committee's approval to make the change. So previously, when we were in scoring, and you'll see it a lot of times, the player will erase it and ask the marker, and then they'll initial it. There doesn't necessarily need to be an initial, but there needs to be that agreement between the marker or the committee, me at the scoring table or someone at the scoring table, and say, yeah, go ahead and change it, type of thing. So there is, you do need to have that approval in order to make that change. And then again, this is just saying that once it's returned to the committee, the player cannot change the scorecard. It's a little bit different in terms of how the scoring area is defined. So we're a little bit flexible in that, is the player is not able to change it once the scorecard is determined to be, done in return, or once they leave the scoring area is how we define it. Some organizations will put stakes or a blue line or something to identify the area of what is the scoring area, so that we know as soon as the player leaves that area, they can't change anything. But we have a lot of times where the player will sign the cards, throw it to us, and then we'll read back the scores to them, 35, 37, 72, and they say, no, I shot 71. We'll give it back to them. They realize that they didn't have one score right, and we can change it there. So it's not necessarily that they give it to the person doing the score. It's just once they leave the scoring area, that's when we can't have any more changes. And so I think that's a common misconception with players, is that they think once they give it to us, they can't make any changes. But it's until they leave the area is when they have. And if the player does not have, doesn't sign the card, doesn't have their marker sign it, or doesn't have a score in each hole, or sorry, a score for each hole, then they are going to be DQ'd. So that's why when we're in scoring, it's important to make sure we're checking everything. And just if you go back really quick to that picture, and typically for those of you that are in scoring, for me it's a 5-check process. So you check the marker spot, the player spot, front 9, back 9 total, to make sure that that's correct. But then also we want to make sure that we have 18 numbers in there as well. Okay, and then this last part, this exception here, is just saying that it's not, the player is not going to get DQ'd because their marker just got pissed off and just left and didn't sign their card which unfortunately happens at least once or twice every year. But in that case, the player's not going to be DQ'd. In that case, we're just going to do what we can as the committee to confirm that the score is correct, hopefully asking another player in the group or tracking down that player that did leave to sign the card. Either case, the player is going to be okay. And then this last part, again, was what I was talking about earlier, is that the committee can define what is the scoring area or when the scorecard has been returned. So typically it's when they leave the scoring area is typically how it's done. Okay, but if we have a wrong score for a given hole, if it's higher than the actual score, then that's okay. But the player is just going to take what they wrote down. So I use this example all the time, but we had a high school match where player was really excited. They broke 40 for the first time, and they wrote 39 down in their card, and then they turned the card in, and then they left. And then after the fact, we realized that the 39 was in the score for the 9th hole, and so they actually shot like a 70-something that day because they didn't have it in the right spot. So in that case, the player wasn't DQ'd, but they did have to take that higher score. But if we have a lower score, then we've got a problem, and then that player is going to be disqualified. However, that's only going to be the case if the player didn't include a penalty that they didn't know about. So this rule has changed over the course of the last 4 or 5 years. It used to be an automatic DQ, no exceptions. Then I think a couple years ago, 2 years ago, it was okay. We're going to give them the penalty. So, but then we're also going to give them a penalty for having the wrong score on their scorecard. So a common example is a player turns their scorecard in, they go to the car and they put their clubs in their trunk and they realize they have 15 clubs in their bag. Well, previously that was automatic disqualification. 2 years ago, I believe, or maybe 3 years ago, it was a 2-stroke penalty on the first 2 holes for having 15 clubs, plus an additional 2-stroke penalty on each 1 and 2 for having a wrong score. So it was an 8-stroke penalty. And then now it's just going to be a 4-stroke penalty. We're not going to have that additional 2-stroke penalty for having a wrong score on the scorecard. We're going to give them the penalty that they earned, but we're not going to double penalize them. So,
yeah, Tiger at the Masters.
Yeah.
Right. Sure. Well, that one was a little different, but yeah, but yeah, I mean, very similar in that there's no longer going to be that just basic penalty, and I think it is more fair, and it does allow, you know, I think the other common example was Patrick Harrington when he was playing in some tournament, and they later found that the ball through use of video evidence that the ball moved, and so then he should have got a penalty for causing the ball to move, because back then that was how the ruling worked out, and so he actually ended up getting DQ'd from the tournament because of some zoomed in video shot that saw his ball move, you know, this far. But then the exception does not apply when the excluded penalty is disqualification. So if we find out after the fact that the player didn't or played a wrong ball and didn't correct it, that penalty is disqualification. So in that case, we're still going to give them the penalty of disqualification. So they're still going to be disqualified. And then the last part, when the player was told that the penalty might apply, but they didn't talk about it with the committee at the end. So if you know, Lee and I are playing and he says, I think that's a penalty, and then we don't talk about it in scoring, or I don't get an answer, then I'm going to be DQ'd if it was indeed a penalty. And so just a couple of famous situations that I think everyone has heard of or maybe seen, but we had, you know, a player here, I think it was the 1957 U.S. Women's Open, player in the bottom left, Jackie Pung. She accidentally put a lower number than what she made in the final round of the tournament. Ended up costing her the the championship, biggest tournament in women's golf. But this was, and I think I told the story last year, but this was at Wingfoot, and the members felt so bad for her that they passed around a plate to collect some winnings for her, and she actually ended up making more than the champion. But her name's not in the trophy, so I'm sure she would take that in a heartbeat. That switch. And the other example is when you have Roberto Di Vincenzo at the Masters in '68. And he mistakenly, his marker actually put a 4 on 17 when he made birdie, and he didn't realize it. He just signed his card and was getting ready for the playoff, and then they realized it after he signed his card and left the scoring area that he really did make a birdie on 17, but his marker wrote down 4, and he had to take the 4, which kept him out of the playoff. So it happens at the highest level. I'm sure it happened last year at some point. I'm sure someone got DQ'd or signed a wrong score, and it's going to continue to happen. But it's something that we in the scoring area try to make a conscious effort to prevent. And then same thing in handicap. You're really at the end of the day for handicap, we're as a committee we're gonna put that or display it on there, but it's up to the player to verify that that's correct. The player's responsible for making sure that's correct. And if the handicap is too high, and this affects the number of strokes the player gets, the player is disqualified from the competition. So I guess a situation where it wouldn't affect the number of strokes is if your handicap is listed as 5.4 and it's really 5.2, and you calculate your course handicap and you're still going to get 6 strokes either way. At that point, it doesn't matter. But if it does give you more strokes than you are actually entitled to, you're going to be DQ'd.
So is it your index or your course handicap on the card?
So it's your handicap, but also it's both. Typically, your course handicap is going to be on the card, right? So that's ultimately what the player is responsible for. I'm just trying to think of an example where you would only have the index on the card. I mean, I don't think that. Yeah. Right.
I mean, you could verify their index.
Right. I mean, I believe that I can't think of any net event where you wouldn't have the course handicap and just the index. I mean, it's going to have that course handicap, but.
And Jen, on your phone, if you put in, the
slope,
the index and the slope, it gives you the.
Of course, sometimes you're playing in a tournament where the pro used the last revision versus one that was just a day or two before the tournament.
Right.
And of course, then it still would be correct, even if you went up or down during that revision. He's not going to change yours and not change everyone else's.
Correct. Yeah, it'd be all based on what the organizers use.
But Jamie, in our tournaments, doesn't the staff figure out the handicap and put it on the card?
Yes.
And that's it. I mean,
that's final.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it's final unless it's wrong.
Yeah.
So, but I think
Never wrong. Never wrong.
I think what this is also alluding to is that if you're playing 4-ball and your handicap, you're supposed to get it says that you get a stroke on hole 7, but really in reality you don't. But then you don't use your score on that hole. In that case, you're not going to be disqualified for that, because if you use your partner score, it doesn't impact the score for your team. I think that's really what this is getting at. Right, Gene?
I don't know.
Okay.
She's retired.
It's
a multi-day tournament that falls over 15th or is your handicap, Gene?
It's up to the committee on what they want to do. They can. We don't recommend that, but I'm sure some clubs or some committees do that. But Yeah, typically it's on a fixed date, and going forward in 2020, the World Handicap is coming out, and that one of the changes for the World Handicap is a daily index update. So when that's the case, the committee is going to have to identify a specific date on what you're using. Yeah,
You
right.
change some of our tournaments, you change their handicap. And the guy comes in with a 57 and you get adjusted for
Right, right. Yeah, the committee is always able to either set a max handicap or they can adjust the player's handicap for any reason. Yeah.
Didn't you do that last year, Jeannie? Didn't you have some sort of chart that if somebody came in so much under par that you were going to adjust the next time they played?
That was not me. I was course rating.
Oh, all right. Was it you then?
It wasn't. No, Ted does. But yeah, no, it is. There's a chart that's in the USA Handicap Manual, and if a player's score is exceptional or outside of the certain probability, then
we adjusted it.
Yeah, and we
Hey,
do.
Kyle.
Yeah, John.
Ted pointed me to a location on your website that explains how he does that.
Right.
So it's out there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and this is just saying if the handicap is too low, then there's no penalty. The player's net score stands using the lower handicap as shown. But again, if the player sees it as lower, we can get it changed. If it is wrong, it needs to be corrected. But if it's not corrected and it's lower, it's okay. And then again, this just goes back to the point we do ask for in the net tournaments that we run. We do ask that the gross scores be written on the card, and that the player is not responsible for adding up the scores or applying the handicap. That's what we're going to be doing. So even if it's a 4-ball, actually specifically for 4-ball events, we do ask that we have the player write down their gross scores for the player that's actually going to count, because we just don't want just one team score. We need to know if it's player A or player B that made the score that's going to count for the team. Okay, and then this is pretty common sense, but again, if the player doesn't hole out and they don't fix it before they either begin the next hole, or in that case of the final round or the final hole before they return their scorecard, the player is going to be disqualified. And there's
your Phil Mickelson.
What do you mean?
Putting up and down the hill, and he just picked the ball up. And
well, he still hold out there. Yeah.
Kyle, how about if a guy misses a putt and he's upset and he just doesn't whack it, but he picks up with the backside of his putter like that and picks up off the green? He's got to replace, but is there a stroke penalty on that? Sure.
Movement of the ball.
Yeah, I mean, as long as it's, I'm assuming that it's not accidental. It's purposeful, so he's gonna put it back.
He didn't make a stroke because he didn't intend to hit it, but he did intentionally touch the ball.
So he just placed it back in just one stroke.
It's one or the other, right? He intentionally touched the ball, or he didn't mark it before he picked it up. Either way, it's one stroke.
We had a situation in the tournament last year, and the group in front of us, it was a 4-ball, okay? And actually, it was a cha-cha-cha, so they needed 3 scores on the par 3.
Okay.
They left the green. They came back. The woman put her ball down and putted in, and I'm like, you can't do that. You can't come back to the green once you've left the green. But because she had used the soda marker,
right,
the spot was still there.
Mm-hmm.
But they determined that it was a 2-stroke penalty. I thought it should just, it didn't make any sense to me.
No, somewhere it says that if you look at this.
It's a 1-stroke penalty. You have to correct before you tee off from the next hole.
Yeah, it just depends if it was,
See, we don't
as John
know,
was saying
we
before.
don't know if anybody had teed off yet, because they were gone from the hole and then they came back.
Yeah, well, as long as if it wasn't the last hole of the round, as long as they went back and fixed it before they teed off in the next hole, it's a 1-stroke penalty. But if it is the last hole last year, as soon as they left the green, then that player's DQ'd, right? So it should be a 1-stroke penalty in that case. Yeah. Assuming that it wasn't the last hole, right? And then what all this is saying here is that the exception or these other situations. I mean, you can obviously pick your ball up and hole out if you're playing in a 4-ball and your partner's in 3 and you're putting for 5. You don't need to hole out. You can go on and continue play. Or if there's a max score, like for our golf days, we have a highest score of 9. If the player doesn't hole out after 9 strokes, it's okay. They can continue on and play. There's no issue there. And again, we have another situation where we've seen this before and we'll see it again. But on that final hole of the round, it's now not going to be. It's only going to be disqualification if they don't correct it before they return their scorecard. So previously it was as soon as they left the putting green. Now it's before they return their scorecard. All right. Any questions on Rule 3? Nope. Great. All right. So Rule 4, we're gonna try. We're gonna spend some time on this, obviously, but we're trying not to get caught down in the these crazy what if scenarios where a player's club gets broken by some crazy act of God or something like that. We're just gonna go over the basics of when a club can be used after it's damaged, and when a player can replace a club, and when it can be repaired, essentially. So Rule 4, the purpose statement covers the equipment the players may use during a round based on the principle that golf is a challenging game in which success should depend on the player's judgment, skills, and abilities. And the player must use conforming clubs and balls, is limited to no more than 14 clubs, and normally must not be replace damage or lost clubs, and is restricted in the use of other equipment that gives artificial help to his or her play. And so the last thing it talks about for detail requirements, it says to reference these equipment rules. So really what the equipment rules are is they're the specifications and other regulations for clubs, balls, and other equipment that players are allowed to use during a round. And these rules are found at usga.org. So the USGA has a separate department that works with conforming golf balls, conforming clubs, and all the ball and club manufacturers have to submit samples to them to get on this list for players to use. And so if we ever have a question come up at our events, we reference these lists on the USGA website to confirm whether the player's club is indeed conforming or ball is conforming or not. And so in some cases, it may just be a brand new club that hasn't been put on there, hasn't been sent in, and we have to get that information. And really, it's on the player to ask that question of the committee: is this club conforming? But it's also for anyone in the competition to be able to say, is that player using conforming equipment? Obviously, we're not out there on the first tee checking everyone's clubs and verifying with the list that's 30 pages long, and if their wedge is conforming or not. It really, obviously we have an idea of certain ones that are, especially when it comes to grooves for USGA qualifiers, but we don't, we're not going to sit there and check that for every single player. It's just not feasible.
Have you ever checked the clubs after, around or for any reason?
I think the way we do it is right. We've got the list at the starters, and we say, you check.
Yeah.
And then if it turns out afterward, somebody raises the point and they're right, there is no statute of limitations on disqualification. But we put the onus where it is, and that's on them, and then we don't have to check every ball, every club, every groove.
Right. It's something that we do check if it gets brought to us, and we'll check right there and then and there to make sure that we get the player that information as soon as we can. One example, I was caddying a U.S. Women's AM probably longer than I wanted to admit ago, but the player that I was caddying for, she had Volvic golf balls, that was one of her sponsors, and she was wondering, or we were wondering if because the pack had orange and purple and green and whatever, that each color, if they could use that different colors, because the one ball rule is in effect. And so we had Jeff Rivard was our walking referee, who used to be, I think, the ED of the GAM, is from Michigan, but he had to call in to get a ruling, and we finally found out about, I think it was like when we got to the putting green on the first hole, because we asked him before we started, and it took 15 minutes to figure it out, which, man, I don't, but anyways, I mean, we weren't planning on losing more than a sleeve of balls out there anyways, but yeah, right. But that would be the answer was that at first the answer we got was we're not sure, only play with one one color, and then finally we got the answer is that they were all conforming. So because
it was all the same.
It was
ball.
Yeah, it was all the same ball, and because of the way it was packaged as a multi-color or whatever pack or
Color
whatever.
didn't change
Color of
the
all
Right.
things of the
Doesn't
ball.
exactly
Right.
exactly yeah. All right, and then a club used to make a stroke must conform not only when the club is new, but also when it's been deliberately or accidentally changed in a way as well. So a lot of times you'll see players will put lead tape on their wedges or on their putter. In that case, we still need to make sure that the club is conforming. Most of the times, a simple small addition of lead tape is not really going to impact the characteristics of the club, but if there is significant change done, then that would need to be clarified that the club is still conforming. Yeah.
I have a putter. I like heavy putters.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my, like a bullseye putter, I put lead, but they're little squares and they're heavy on top. Is that legal? It's not tape. It's thicker than tape. No, no, not the bull, but it's got.
No, I know. I mean, I don't know all those specifics. I know that a certain amount of lead tape is okay, and typically you do see it on putters, and typically it's at the bottom of the club or at the exactly. But yeah, so typically that's okay. I'm sure there is an exact limit of how much can be put on because of the weight of the club and how it's balanced. But I mean, that's something that we would have to either consult the USGA or look specifically in these equipment rules to see if there is a.
I think you can start with the lead tape, but you cannot take it off
Can't take
during
it
the
off.
round or
Because it
after
changes.
during the round.
But it's not.
Correct.
I think the little.
Correct.
You stick at the bottom, but they're what? They're little squares. And I think.
Okay, but then this is saying here that if the performance characteristics of a conforming club change because of wear through normal use, it's still a conforming club. So, for example, if you were playing with that lead tape and it fell off during your round, you could still continue to play with it. Yes.
Before, right?
No, I think you could still continue to.
You could take it off and put something new.
You could still. I'm not saying that you can put something new on it, but that you can continue to play with it, even if that lead tape does fall off.
So what you're saying is that Tom Rex wedge is okay to continue to use.
What's the story behind that?
You've never seen it?
No.
Had an indentation about this big, just like a golf ball. He and Don Stevens did the same thing. They played with those wedges for 25, 30 years. There's more bulk hole right in the middle of it.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, I think that unless it doesn't meet the groove requirements for a USGA qualifier, but
very much groove
that I don't believe that's not in effect yet for us.
It says wear through normal use, that changed conformity.
Yep.
So it doesn't say how long you can use it.
Right. Well, there are going to be some groove requirements I believe for all competitions. I don't know the exact date, but I want to say it's in a couple of years. So that could impact it because right now for GAM events we don't have any groove
Yeah, right here it
requirements.
says a depression is formed on the club face through repeated use, or grooves on the club face are worn.
Right.
That doesn't.
But for USGA qualifiers, they have specific sets of groove requirements that they require. But it's not that's not applied to all. It's not applied to the rules of golf.
Kyle. Hey, Kyle.
Yeah.
But if you're using a conforming club and the grooves are pretty much worn out, you can still use that club, according to this.
Correct. Correct.
Right? Okay.
Correct.
Okay, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
On a putter, okay, a lot of people use the little sucker thing or whatever to pull the ball out of the hole, right? There are some that fold up, and when you open it up, it pulls the ball out of the hole. It doesn't change how you use the club. But I was told that because it has a moving part, it's illegal.
Right. I'll have to look into that because I don't know specifically.
And that doesn't even make any sense because it doesn't affect anything.
I'll look
use
into
that in
that.
the cha-cha tournament.
I'll look into that.
We were the ones who they were in front of us.
So again, this is kind of an internal definition here, but performance characteristics, and we'll see this quite a bit in the next in this rule 4, means any part of the club that affects how it performs in making a stroke, such as the grip, shaft, club head, or lie or lock, including the lie or lock of an adjustable club. All right, so what happens if the club is damaged during the round? So if a conforming club is damaged during the round or while play is stopped under suspension, the player normally must replace it with another club. Must not replace it with another club except if the player didn't cause the damage. So you can still, no matter the nature of the damage, you can still use that damaged club, and it's treated as conforming for the rest of the round. But you have to be careful in a playoff for stroke play. That is a new round. So in that case, if a player, so I'll just use an example. Previously, if a player got angry and they took their putter and they slammed it on their bag and the shaft bent, or the lie of the club was altered, the player could no longer use that club. So we commonly saw on the PGA Tour players putting with wedges or other clubs because of that situation. Now they can continue to use that damaged putter, but if they did go to a playoff in stroke play, they would not be able to because that's the start of a new round. It's only during the continuation of that round where they can continue to use that.
So they replace this.
No. Yes. For the new round, they can. Yes.
They have to.
Right.
They have to replace it. They can't use it.
They can't.
Right.
They could go with 13 clubs.
Right. Yep.
So even if you get mad and you bang the putter and it becomes non-conforming, you can still play with it.
Correct. Yeah, that's a change.
Okay.
Yeah, for that round, you can still use that club.
Use that little piece. Oh, I don't do that. No, of course, I'll blame it.
I see your stroke. I would too.
Okay, so provided that the club. Let me just read this here. Have the player may have the club repaired by restoring it as nearly as possible to its condition before the damage happened during the round or while the play was stopped, but they have to use the original grip, shaft, and club head. So if you snap your driver shaft in half, you can have it repaired, but it has to be repaired with that same shaft, grip, and club head. So you couldn't go in and they couldn't have the pro shop put in a brand new shaft. It has to be that same one, but it also needs to be done in a timely manner. So we can't delay play by doing this. We can't stop what we're doing and send the club in and wait for it to come back. But the player does have the option to have it repaired, a damaged club to have it be repaired.
This might sound.
So I can put my tape back.
When they have
What'd you say, Mick?
I can put my tape back on, right?
Correct.
on the PGA Tour, they have those big club repair guys that take care of every player. Basically, would it be legal if he's following you around to take the damaged club and go repair it while you're still playing and come back and give it to you?
Correct, but it has to be that same, like I said, the same grip, shaft, and club head.
The same shaft?
Same shaft.
Yeah, that's what it says.
Same type.
No,
No.
not same type. The exact same. So
Well, still using the original grip, shaft, and club
it
head.
has to be the exact same one. Not.
Not that hard, guys.
Yeah. So it's not that if I had an Aldila whatever that I just go and get a different or the same exact one. It has to be that specific one that you use as broken in half, that's taped together or fused together or whatever. I don't know how that would happen, but that's kind of how that's how it works. It has to be that same exact one. And the other thing too, when it comes to this, and I'm sure we'll get to it, but same thing goes for if you have drivers or 3-woods that have draw regular fade. If that does become loose, the player can readjust it to where it was during that round, but they can't change the settings on it. So that's a common question that we see in our events, especially the AM qualifiers and GAM qualifiers. Okay, and then again, so this is for damage during the round. So if a club was damaged prior to the round, that damage can't be repaired. And then again, it's because of the club's performance characteristics are changed because of any act during the round, and including when play is stopped. Okay, whether it's by the player or by another person, but a club is not damaged during a round if its performance characteristics are deliberately changed by the player during the round. All right, moving on here. So again, this is just saying that we just talked about. I'm not going to spend a ton of time, but you can't if you have something if you have a club, you can't add tape to it during the round. You can have that tape there, it come off, and you can put the tape back on, but you can't add tape or change it to a draw or something like that during your round. And again, this is saying that you can always restore it to its original condition. So if you do make a stroke with a club that's not conforming, it is going to be disqualification, but there's no penalty for just carrying this club. So if you have a club that you or a putter that you bend over your bag, and then you start a playoff or you start round 2, that club can still be in your bag, but you can't use it, and you're not going to get a penalty unless you actually use the club. But that club is still going to count towards your 14 that you have. And the other thing that gets lost in this too is that all these rules about damage. If the player doesn't have 14 clubs, they can always add a 14th club or up to 14 clubs. So if I have 13 clubs in my bag and I snap my driver, I can go or have someone in the tour van bring out another driver to me and play with that, and I'm fine. But I can't go over that 14 club limit.
Okay.
Yeah.
So some simulators use like a reflective dot in the face of the club. So if that's on the club when you're playing, is that considered altering performance? Or it's generally on the perimeter face?
I'm not sure. What are you talking like when you're getting fitted for a club, or? Yeah, I mean, typically that I don't know for certain. I would guess that tape is not conforming. You'd have to take that off to play. I don't know for sure, but I'll look at that one as well. I would imagine that.
Tape
Right.
Same. So if this is a half, it's about a quarter of an inch diameter.
Quarter inch.
Shouldn't affect the play.
It's just like I don't know. Well, I'll look into it, but
Start with it, I guess you couldn't take it
yeah.
off during the round, right?
I don't even know what he's talking about. Either way.
Okay. We all know this, 14 clubs. If we don't have 14 clubs, we can add up to 14 clubs. As soon as a player becomes aware that they have more than 14 clubs, they need to declare that excess club out of play. And the player can do that in multiple ways. They can just discard it. They can flip it upside down in their bag, but they do need to declare that club is out of play and notify either by taking it out, or if they do flip it inside their bag, or just say they need to let someone know what clubs are out of play. They can't just, after the round pick which club they didn't use as to be out of play. They have to declare a certain club out of play. Okay, and then this last part here, it just common sense. But if a player, if I forget my wedge on near the green, and Mike picks it up and gives it puts it in his bag, and that causes him to have 15 clubs, he's not going to get penalized for that. But he can't use that club that I left. All right, sharing clubs. You're limited to those 14 clubs. You can't share clubs with another person that's playing on the course. And when the player becomes aware that he or she has breached the rule by making a stroke with another player's club, that you must immediately declare that club out of play, just like we talked about previously. And again, when it comes to sharing clubs, if you do have a partner competition, the partners can have up to 14 clubs. So they can't, I can't have 10 and then Lynn have 10 clubs and us share. We can only combine to have 14. So we can each play out of the same bag as long as it only has 14 clubs, but we can't combine to be more than 14. That's not changing.
So could you have 7 and the other player have 7?
Mm-hmm. So then if a player starts with 14 clubs or added clubs up to a limit of 14, then loses or damaged clubs during a round, the player must not replace it with another club. So again, once you get to 14, you're stuck with those clubs. You can't add clubs at that point. You can repair those damaged clubs with those certain limitations that we talked about, but you can't add beyond that point. However, you can replace a damaged club when the player did not cause the damage. So if the player's club is damaged during the round by outside influence or natural forces, or by any other person other than the player or his or her caddy, the player may replace the damaged club with any club. But when the player does so, the player must immediately take the damaged club out of play and declare that out of play. So you're playing an event and some crazy fan comes up and
Or a golf cart.
yeah,
Goes over your club.
yeah, exactly. Golf cart from another group runs over your club. You can have that replaced in that case. But again, it has to be an outside influence or natural forces, or by another person other than the player or his or her caddy, or basically his side. So if it's a partner match, if your partner ran over your clubs, you're still not going to be able to replace those. So pick your partners wisely.
I was just going to ask that question.
Yes.
Where does it say partner?
It's
Back in the partner part. Back about rules.
So there's a couple exceptions, but basically anytime you see, I shouldn't say with 100% certainty, but typically when you see when you see here other than the player or his or her caddy, that typically is applying to a single player playing alone. If there's a team event, it's typically that typically means that their side.
No, that's fine.
Okay, and again, we can't add or replace clubs. It can't slow down play. We can't borrow a club from anyone who's playing on the course. Currently, we can borrow a club from someone that finished up in the morning round and is not playing on the course. And we can't build a club from parts carried by anyone other by anyone for the player during the round. So your example of the tour van, that player can't get that club put together for them by parts not of that original club, unless there's we talked about the few exceptions where we can replace or add clubs. And then here we have a situation. So once a player becomes aware of the breach while playing the hole, the penalty is applied at the end of the hole being played in match play. Again, this is going to be an adjustment to the match, not necessarily a loss of hole. So if we're playing a match and we have an issue with clubs, we're going to continue the play of the hole and then adjust the match after the fact. And then if it happens between two holes, the penalty is applied at the end of the hole just completed, not the next hole. So again, it's an adjustment penalty for match play. This is one of those few where we're not actually, it's not a loss of hole. We're going to continue to play on and then adjust the match.
It's the only adjustment, isn't it?
I think I don't know for sure. I know that the change. I know that there's less changes or there's less adjustments now. Is that so? That this is the only one you're saying?
It is the only one, yes.
Yeah. All right.
What about more than one can?
That changed. So now that's not an adjustment.
Used to be transportation. Used to be everything. It's the only one now.
Right. That's easier to remember.
That's why I brought it up.
Yeah, thank you.
Nick's saying if he can remember it, anybody can remember it.
We know better.
I don't know about that.
We know better than that.
Okay, and again, this is just saying we're talking. If, for example, a player has more than 14 clubs, we're just going to revise the match or adjust the match a maximum of 2 holes. So if the player if this happened on the second hole, the player finished the hole and they were 2 down, and they had 15 clubs in their bag, and they're now going to be 4 down after 2 holes. And there's just another example. 15 clubs playing the 3rd hole. They win the hole. They go 3 up. They're going to be adjusted down 2, so now they're only 1 up. Stroke play, it's going to be 2 strokes per hole, but a maximum of 4. And so the penalty is going to apply to the hole to the holes, either the first 2 holes of the round, in the case if we find out on the 5th hole, or if it happens on the first hole, it'll apply to the first hole. If it happens between the first and second hole, it's going to be applied to the first hole. And this is just talking about what we talked about before, but essentially the player does need to declare those clubs out of play and needs to indicate which one is going to be taken out of play.
It doesn't really say you need to declare that. It says if the player had it. Earlier on that too, it just said you have to take it out of play. It doesn't say really that you have to make sure anyone else knows that.
Okay. Well, here it says that the player must immediately take an action that clearly indicates each club that is being taken out of play, and be done either by declaring this to the opponent or match player, the marker, or another player in the group, or taking some other clear action such as turning the club upside down in the bag, placing it on the floor of the golf cart, or giving the club to another person.
And starting one says if the player started with more than 14, you can choose which clubs or clubs to be taken out of play. That's kind of all it says.
Before you start?
Yeah,
Yeah, but that's the procedure.
4, 1, 2, 1.
We can't hear him.
3rd bullet.
So
Page 38 in the small book.
the question was the player. So it's where is
fourth bullet or third bullet on the page there.
Yeah, that rule is saying that if that's what happened,
Yeah.
and then this rule
Oh,
is
yeah,
the
yeah.
procedure for
Right,
saying.
right,
right.
So if I take it and I put it upside down, but I don't tell anybody, I think I'm okay.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
you followed the procedure.
Right.
Before I started playing.
No,
Maybe.
that's if you get to the first tee accidentally. If you know you've got 15 walking from the parking lot, then there's one of these little subsections that says you get penalized.
Yeah. So the question was basically for everyone else was that do I need to declare this or announce this that I'm taking the club out of play? And here we have the 2 points that we need to do either one of these two things. So we either need to declare it or we need to take some clear action. So if you did, as you were saying, Tony, if you just flipped it upside down, you not necessarily wouldn't need to tell anyone that. We would just make the assumption that club is out of play. But if for some reason you wanted to have that club in play and you didn't have and you had less than 14 clubs, you would need to let someone know if you flip that around.
It clarifies it on page 63 in the bigger book, in the number 2, before the round. And it clarifies that totally.
What page?
63 in this book. This is a player becomes aware shortly before starting a round that he or she accidentally has more than 14 clubs. The player should leave the excess club or clubs behind. But as an option, without penalty, you can. And then down below it says if a player deliberately brings more than 14 clubs to his or her first teeing area and starts the round without leaving the excess clubs behind, this option is not allowed, and Rule 4.1b applies. Of course, then that's being able to read someone's mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're gonna continue to move on. 60. All right. We're gonna, it's I guess for our events, we're really gonna strongly encourage that we double check the players have 14 clubs and that we let them know that they need to have 14 clubs. Or less. Yes. Yes. So we really just went over this. Patty just read it to us, so no need to worry about that. So softballs here. Conforming ball must be played. So we need to have the player needs to use a conforming ball when they play. Obviously, we have certain events, USGA qualifiers, where we do have the one ball rule that's in effect. In those cases, that the player needs to conform to that specific set of rules for that USGA qualifier. We also have the one ball rule in effect for a decent number of our championships. So the amateurs, the GAM championships, and then a few others also have the one ball rule in effect. Okay, and then the player must not make a stroke at a ball whose performance characteristics have been deliberately altered, such as scuffing or heating the ball or by applying any substance other than cleaning it. And then if we do have, if a player does make a stroke with a non-conforming ball, it is going to be a DQ. And then if the ball breaks into pieces while playing the hole, the stroke is going to be canceled, and I guess not canceled. The stroke does not count, and then the players must play another ball from where the stroke was made. Hopefully that never happens.
Now, the big thing there that I think we have to cover, because we had a problem here before, that the practice ball is a conforming ball.
That's in the big book under the interpretations, X-out balls and
4.2a.
I know exactly where it is, but I mean, what I'm saying is I think all of our rules officials should know this so we don't DQ a player if he happens to be playing a practice ball that conforms like we did in the past.
Right. Yeah. No, that's That's a good point because sometimes we do have a player do play a nice practice ball or a Pro V1 that has practice on the side, and that's okay. We have a different scenario if we have a player playing like an actual range ball that's not conforming, but we typically don't see that at our events. Yeah, Mike.
This is for Nick also. High school state tournaments, when it was about 32 degrees, the coach had a heater in his cart, and the competitors were coming up and using it to warm their hands, and they had balls in their hand. And I was approached by another coach about what to do. Hang on.
Yeah, I mean, it clearly states here that you can't deliberately. And again, this is it all comes back to whether it's deliberate or accidental. I mean, if you have a hand warmer in your pocket and you just put the ball in there out of habit and you're not doing it deliberately, there's no penalty. But if you're going to the coach's cart and deliberately trying to warm up your golf ball, then we're going to have an issue.
I don't believe that was the case. They were trying to get their hands warm.
Right, and the ball just happened to be in their hand, and so that's really, yeah, and that's really what it comes down to, is if it's deliberate or accidental. So that's the question that you'd want to ask.
That rule was in effect prior to 2019.
Right.
You were there.
All right, lifting to see the ball if it was cut or cracked. So typically now the balls don't necessarily get, they do get scuff marks on there, but the damage to the golf ball, because of the technology and the way that the ball is produced now, it's very, very limited. So really your ball needs to be cut or cracked in order for it to be taken out of play. Now you can lift the ball to see that. But you do need to mark its position, check to see if it's cracked, and then if it is, then you can obviously replace it. But one of the small changes to the rules this year is that we don't need to announce that we're doing this. Previously, and we'll see this with other rules as well, but you don't need to announce that you're lifting your ball to determine if it's cut or cracked, or to identify it. You no longer need to announce that you're doing it. But you have to have reasonable belief, or there has to be reasonable evidence that you do need to check it. You're not just going to always be able to lift your ball to see if it's cut or scraped. When you hit it right down the middle of the fairway, there's not really a reasonable chance that the ball got cut or cracked at that point. But if you hit a cart path or hit a tree really hard, at that point, you could lift your ball to see if it is cut or cracked. But again, you have to mark it. So anytime that we are lifting our ball and we're going to be putting it back on the same spot, we have to mark it. If we don't, we're going to get a penalty for doing that, 1 stroke. But this is something players can do if they choose.
Can they clean it?
They can clean it if the rule allows it to be clean. So if the ball's on the putting green, they could clean it.
Yeah,
If it was covered in, if it was covered in mud and you needed to clean it to see if it was cracked, you probably could. But I mean, it'd be a situation where you'd have to have a really, really good proof that the ball is cut or cracked. A common example with that, when we're not in this rule, but if you're looking to identify your ball, if it's completely covered in mud, you need to clean a little bit of it to see. It's a Titleist 3 or whatever, you can. And I would assume that the same principle would apply if it's cut or cracked, but you'd really need to be careful that you're not,
If it's cut or cracked, you could feel for a cut or crack without cleaning it. I mean, technically.
Right. Sure, possibly. I mean, that would probably be a recommended way to do it than to actually go through cleaning it. But again, we can, if it is on the green, that the player, and that's what it says here in this exception, is that if the ball is on the green, we do have the option to clean it because the rule, putting green rule, allows us to do that. Okay, so if it is clearly seen that the original ball is cut or cracked and the damage happened during the hole being played, the player can substitute another ball. So at that point, their ball hits a cart path. There's a big gash in it because they hit the cart path, a huge cut, or it got ran over by a lawnmower or something like that. They can then replace that ball after they lifted it, put it back on the spot, and continue on. But again, this is just clarifying that you can't replace the ball if it's only scratched or scraped, or if the paint has been damaged or discolored. So a typical scuff mark from a cart path is not going to qualify for your ball being cut or cracked.
Yeah.
Some of the new wedges actually pull up little pieces of the surface of the ball when you hit it, and you can see it kind of hanging off there a little bit. Would we just consider that to be scuff?
Yeah, that's a good question. Question was for everyone that if the wedge scuffs it up, again, I think that's going to be a scuff mark or a scratch. That's not going to be grounds to have it replaced. But and I'm sure we'll say it in a slide or two if maybe I missed it, but the player can always substitute another ball at the end of the hole. Right, so if there is that scuff mark on it, once they're done playing that hole, before they go and start playing the next hole, they can put a brand new ball in play. All right, rule 4.3. So use of equipment. So this is a big one under here is rangefinders. That's what we'll see, but there's also a lot of others.
I think there's a second sentence. I think is
Sure.
way important beyond just being a second sentence.
Sure. So
this is the rule that covers equipment. There's nothing in it that talks about like moving parts or anything else. It only governs how equipment will be used. It does not limit the equipment a player may have. That's one of those your eye just flips right over.
Right. I just did it. Okay, so a player may use equipment to help his or her play during a round, except that the player must not create a potential advantage by using equipment other than the club or ball that artificially eliminates or reduces the need for a skill or judgment that is essential to the challenge of the game. So a big one here, anchoring, that the USGA has and RNA have come down on, is that this is something that they feel eliminates the skill of the game by anchoring it to your body. So that's something that's one example where you can't use equipment in a certain way. And then using equipment in an abnormal way and making a stroke abnormal means a way that is fundamentally different than it is intended to use and not normally recognized as part of playing the game. This rule does not affect the application of any other rule that limits actions a player is allowed to take with a club, ball, or other equipment, such as setting down a club or other object to help the player in lining up. We'll talk about that in Rule 10. Oops. All right, so common uses of equipment that are allowed. So allowed for distance measuring devices, as long as they're only measuring distance or direction. So a compass or a distance measuring device, as long as they're not measuring elevation or things like that, they're allowed. Again, we talked about they're not allowed if they're measuring elevation, interpreting distance or directional information, such as a device to get a recommended line of play or club selection based on the player's ball. So we don't see a ton of that, but basically in our events, now going forward, we don't have to have a local rule in place. A allowing rangefinders, because now the rules of golf allow rangefinders, but we can put a local rule in place to disallow them. So for the open events or the open qualifiers that we do for the USGA, those rangefinders will be disallowed at those events. So the US Open locals, the Senior Open, and then if we're not doing a Women's Open this year, or at least they haven't asked us yet. So in one of those 3 events, rangefinders will not be allowed. For everything else, they're going to be allowed.
Are you positive of that?
What's the scenario where that wouldn't be the case?
Pardon me?
You mean positive about USGA events, or?
Exactly. I mean, the USGA writes these rules and stuff. What are they gonna do? Snub this one?
Well, they're going to put a local rule in place for the U.S. Open, the U.S. Senior Open, and the U.S. Women's Open to disallow rangefinders.
That's my question. You're positive of that?
I mean, everything that they've told us that's going to be the case. Yes.
Okay. That's all I asked.
Yeah. I mean, that's what they've had in place for the last, I think, 2 or 3 years now. So.
But 2019, Kyle, they wrote these new rules that said that they're here. That's the only reason I question it.
Right.
I think that they're either up their toe and have to say that, hey, we allow it, or else make a fool of themselves, which they do pretty good.
Right. Well, they're trying to save the jobs for the caddies. I think, but they have changed. Previously, it was all U.S. Open events, and then I think in 2016 or maybe 2015 they went that everything but the opens, rangefinders weren't allowed. And I know that the web.com tour, I think they had last year, they had 3 or 4 events where they tested out rangefinders. And I don't know if the tours themselves are allowing them, but well, I know the tours are not allowing rangefinders, but there is that option. As far as we've been told, the USGA prohibiting rangefinders in their open championships and qualifiers for those open championships.
Wow. How about the rangefinders that do wind or elevation change, but you can turn it off? I mean, if somebody came to you and said, hey, he's doing it, and all it takes is a flick and it's on, how would you, I mean, I wouldn't know. Are you using it or not? I'm not going to say yes. I
have one that does both, but you have to have the red thing on the front if it does, and the black thing on the front if it doesn't. So I can't just flip a switch. I have to actually change out a part, and that red indicates. So, but some of the other ones do say that switch.
Yeah, it's and you're with your question. In that case, you would ask the player if the player is going to lie to you. Then that's on them. I mean, we have to go with what the player says, unless another person or more than one person saw them get information. They knew that it was enabled. Then we would go with what the player says. And as Jim says, it's a game of honor, and we're going to trust what the player says.
But in your situation, you've got verification and there's a switch that you can see them coming to switch.
Right.
The more evidence you get, the more likely you are to call them.
Yeah. And that's, I think, I don't know who, I think maybe Mick uses this phrase, but it's all, when we're asking players questions, it's always good to not ask yes and no questions, because most of the time the player is going to tell us that, oh yeah, I had it on, and so you're just going to ask the player. Sometimes they're just going to tell us, yeah, I was using it to get elevation change. At that point, it's pretty cut and dry there. All right, information on wind and other weather conditions. So we're going to get to that. It's the first time it's not a DQ. First time it's going to be a 2-stroke, and then that second time it's going to be a DQ, I believe. But we'll get to that here in a second. So wind and other weather conditions, you can get any type of weather information, including wind speed, that is available from weather forecast, or you can get the temperature or the humidity at the golf course. What's not allowed is having a device that measures the wind speed at the course, or using an artificial object to get other wind-related information, such as powder to access to assess wind direction.
How about cigarette smoke?
I've seen them do that.
Can't pick up the grass
Yeah.
anymore.
I think that, I mean, if you're,
That's not artificial.
I don't know. I'll look into that. I'm not gonna.
I want to risk
find
the
out.
cancer, go ahead.
But I didn't inhale.
All right.
So late, let's pull out bubbles. Seriously,
Yeah.
two bubbles. It's really funny, but it's
Handy when you're shooting out for 300 yards.
Information gathered before, during a round. Allowed using information that was gathered before the round, such as playing information from previous rounds, swing tips, or club recommendations, recording, playing or physiological information from the round, such as club distances, playing statistics, or heart rate. But you can't, it's not allowed to process or interpret playing information from the round, such as club recommendations based on your current round distances, or any physiological information recorded during the round. So we're not, yeah, exactly. Your Fitbit. I mean, if you know that you can look at what you did from previous round, but current information or current round, you can't look at your heart rate and right, exactly.
Somebody will try this.
So audio and video, this is something that they've kind of turned back to the committee to decide on how the committee wants to define it. But
So you can play music now?
hold on.
Well, there's something else.
Get a dog barking.
Be kind to your neighbors.
All right. So you can listen. So listening to audio or watching video on matters unrelated to the competition being played, such as news, news reports, or background music. But the consideration should be shown to others. And then the other thing is that you can't listen to music or other audio to eliminate distractions or to help with swing tempo. So if you're listening to that for that specific reason, then that's going to be against the rules. But the committee, and we'll get to this, the committee can basically put in restrictions on these devices. So we could say, as a committee, we're not going to allow music during our events.
But if they're using the headphones, whether they say they're using it to block out the sound or not, can't prove that. So is it music here or it's just the truth?
And it's an open discussion. Why are you listening to music? If the answer is it helps with my swing, then turn it off.
How about if you're playing it to distract your other guys?
Well, consideration should be shown to others.
It's not a good yes or no question.
Exactly. So, and this rule here is this committee procedure again is just allowing the committee to say what is going to be allowed. So we might have a different stance on music in the net tournaments as opposed to the Michigan Amateur.
So you don't know what the GA is going to do yet.
I don't know what we have decided for our events. I mean, I would imagine, or maybe anyone that is, I don't know if here has been in those discussions, but I know we had a complaint in the net tournament, one of the net tournaments last year, about players listening to music, and I think that that's something that we'll have to clarify whether we're going to allow it or not. I think again, it really just comes down to the type of event. I mean, for a net event, I think just let it. But
speeding up play, making the game more attractive. I've had it at our course where let me call them the kids, have radio devices and are playing in the cart.
We have stereo.
Boombox.
And so this, I think, is just an accommodation to them. It's not a suggestion to us that we change the terms of our competition.
Right. It's just putting the power back in the hands of the committee. saying you can, because before, you couldn't necessarily disallow this and this, this use. Whereas now you can say it's giving the committee the authority to say no music during the round. Whereas before it was just an open-ended decision where it was saying as long as you weren't using it to, eliminate distractions or help with your swing, then it was okay. But now it's saying that the committee can just say exit out completely. And I don't know what we're going to be doing. I would imagine that we will have some policy for our net tournaments. I would imagine that we probably won't address it for the other events because it just never happens. But you say that and then it probably will happen, right? So yeah. All right, gloves and gripping agents, we're not going to worry about that. Stretching devices and training or swing aids. Using any equipment for general stretching other than in making a practice swing, whether the equipment is designed for stretching for use in golf, such as an alignment rod placed across your shoulders, or for any purpose unrelated to golf, such as a rubber tubing or a section of pipe is allowed, but you can't use any type of golf training or swing aid, such as an alignment rod or a weighted head cover or donut, on a non-conforming club to make a practice swing on or in any other way that creates a potential advantage by helping the player in preparing for or making a stroke.
How about those orange whips?
That's a no.
That's a no.
Correct. Yeah, that'd be a swing aid.
Yeah.
Correct.
Part of the alignment. It helps you swing the right path.
What's the penalty?
Absolutely.
So we're getting to that here.
First time, general penalty. Second time, free trip to the
Yeah. So we'll
Can you carry that device, that orange whip?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah. So
that's the way I read it.
So the penalty comes at the end here, but the penalty for all the breaches of Rule 4.3, so whether it's a rangefinder that is measuring slope, the first time it happens, it's going to be the general penalty or a two-stroke penalty in stroke play or loss of hole in match play, and then the second time it's going to be a DQ. Okay, so another thing to note here is that this applies even if the nature of the breach was entirely different than the breach resulting in the first penalty. So if I breached my penalty for my rangefinder, and then I breached my penalty for using my orange whip, then that second time is going to be DQ'd. I don't get two warnings essentially for that. It's just one warning and then DQ, regardless of what 4.3 infraction I break. And then a couple things, medical exception. So a player, if they're using it for medical reason to use the equipment, then they're not going to be penalized for that. So I know it's probably like 8 or so years ago. I know that in one of the state finals, there was a player that was allowed to use a cart because of some condition that she had with her leg. So that would be something where the player is going to be absolved from penalty in that case. And then tape or similar. So you can apply adhesive tape to help for a medical condition, but the tape must not be applied excessively or help the player more than is necessary for the medical reason. So if you needed to tape up your wrist because it was hurt, you can do that. We see that at the highest level. We see the kinesiology tape or whatever it is that players wear, whether it's on their wrists or their elbow or their knees. But they can't excessively put it on there or give them to basically create an advantage or immobilize a joint in this case. All right. So much for Rule 5 and 6, huh? Let's do this. This was the old presentation. Never really got to 5. Let's do.
And what you do is you bring it up.
Let's do a rules quiz really quick. We got some time.
We got some ideas.
Maybe we don't have time. Yay or nay? Rules quiz or no?
Sure.
Okay.
Quiz.
Hey, Kyle,
Yeah.
where is it written, what is the penalty for using a non-conforming ball? I can't find the sentence or something that I could show a player what the penalty is going to be.
It's DQ. I think
I must be.
It's 4-2. 4-2A, page 41 in the book.
Qualification. Review.
Page 41.
Twist with that.
Yeah. Yes, 41 in the regular rules of golf book. It's rule 4.2A, and the penalty is disqualification if you make a stroke with a non-conforming ball.
I must have a different book then.
Right underneath, look, it's right at the back part of it, Bill. Right under 42A2. We'll text it to you.
If you're looking at the big book, it's page 65. Is where it has the disqualification penalty. 63 is where it talks about conforming balls. All right, question 1.
Okay.
If a ruling by a referee is found to be wrong, the ruling will be corrected if possible under the rules. If it's too late to do so, the wrong ruling stands.
True.
Okay, a player strikes his or her ball from a bunker onto the next tee area. Another player who is making a practice swing accidentally strikes the moving ball. The ball comes to rest in the yellow penalty area. What is the ruling? The ball must be placed on the spot where it was struck on the tee. The player must play the ball as it lies in the yellow penalty area or take relief under the penalty area rule. The player must replay the stroke from the bunker.
Second one, Kyle.
Oh.
There's a lot of votes for A in the room here, so we're gonna go with A.
Apparently, I got
God, play it as it lies. It says accident.
Was hit by a move.
All right, John thinks it's B. John, we'll remember that when we correct ourselves.
I agree, Kyle.
Most people think it's B, but we're gonna keep it as A and move on. In match play, A mistakenly lifts his or her ball from the putting green without marking it. The opponent B lifts his or her ball without marking it and says he or she has won the hole because he or she thinks that A gets the general penalty. What is the ruling? B is correct and A gets the general penalty. B is not correct that A gets the general penalty, and both A and B get a one-stroke penalty for lifting without marking and must replace their balls, or there's no penalty to either player and the hole is tied. B?
I think the no penalty rule.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's match.
Both lifted their ball without marking.
Yeah.
All right. We'll find the correct answer in a little bit. Which is incorrect.
And then they get into the double, triple negative.
A dangerous animal condition exists when a dangerous animal near a ball could seriously endanger the player if the ball were played as it lies. A player may take relief without penalty from a dangerous animal condition, even if playing the ball would be clearly unreasonable for a player or for a reason other than the dangerous animal. And relief is allowed for a dangerous animal condition for a ball in a penalty area. So which one is not correct? B?
Oh,
That one's on Kyle.
A ball that has moved downward has not moved as defined by the rules. True or false? True or false? True?
Gravity.
False.
False?
Yes.
In four-ball match play, a player improves conditions affecting the stroke to be made by his or her partner, but the action is of no help to the player. What is the ruling? The partner is disqualified for the hole. The player gets no penalty. The player is disqualified for the hole. The partner gets no penalty. The side gets the general penalty. We got one for B. B. All right. In 4-ball match play, a player's ball is farthest from the hole, while his or her partner's ball is closest to the hole. The player decides to putt first. The partner decides to putt first, but he or she will be standing on the line of play of one of the opponents. The opponent objects to this procedure because they say it will adversely affect their play. What is the ruling? The player whose ball is farthest from the hole does not putt first. The side will lose the hole for not playing in turn. If the partner whose ball is closest to the hole putts first and in doing so stands on the line of play of one of the opponents, he or she will be disqualified from the hole. In this situation, the side may play in any order they choose without penalty.
C.
Yeah.
C. Okay, in stroke play, a player picks up his or her ball that is overhanging the hole without pulling out and plays from the next teen area. After return to the scorecard and before the close of the competition, a spectator brings this to the attention of the committee. What is the ruling? The scorecard stands as returned. The committee must add the general penalty of 2 strokes to the player's score. The player is disqualified.
DQ. Stroke
See?
plays got to be.
Okay.
Didn't hold out.
Yeah, but isn't it, if the thing is overhanging the cup, under the new definition, isn't the ball in the cup?
No.
No, it's overhanging.
It's overhanging.
In the
It's got to
cup.
be below the.
It's got to be below the. It's got to be below the level. Yeah.
If you halfway down.
It's not
Right, it has to be.
It's not overhanging. By
The
definition.
rule says now that if it's leaning against the flag, it has to, part of the ball has to be below.
Below the
Correct.
flag.
Correct. Yeah.
Not hold on.
In stroke play qualifying for match play, a player returned a scorecard in which the player unintentionally failed to include in the score for a hole a penalty of 1 stroke that the player knew he or she got. So they knew he or she got. The error is discovered after the player began match play. What is the ruling? The committee should take no action since the error was unintentional. The committee has no authority to take action at this time since the qualifying competition was closed when the error was discovered. The committee should disqualify the player since the player knew of the penalty before he or she returned the scorecard. Okay, see? That seems fair. I don't know if it's the actual rule. We'll find out.
I like how you said that.
In stroke play, during the play of the next to last hole of the round, a player announces that he or she will play a second ball under Rule 21.1C3 and selects the second ball to count. Then the player plays both balls from a wrong place and has committed a serious breach with the procedure used for both balls. The player plays from the teen area of the last hole, completes the round, and reports to the committee before returning his or her scorecard. What is the ruling? The score with the original ball counts, the score with the second ball counts, the player is DQ'd. Yeah, we are pretty mean. A lot of DQs in this one. We got 8 right. All right.
Oh, we're making progress.
Which ones did we get wrong?
All right. So second one. So a player strikes his or her ball from a bunker onto the next teen area. Another player who is making a practice swing accidentally strikes the moving ball. The ball comes to rest in the yellow penalty area. What is the ruling? So the correct answer is the player must play the ball as it lies in the yellow penalty area or take relief under the penalty area rule. So the explanation is in 11.
It's an outside influence.
Outside influence.
Moving ball.
It's no different than hitting the tree.
Now accidents, you just sort of play the ball where it goes. If it was in anything but the putting green, right?
Right. And it'd be the same thing if it was your ball hits a cart and goes out of bounds. You just have to accept that.
And if it deflected into the fairway, you'd be playing from the fairway.
Right. That's the old rub of the green.
Interesting.
You got that one right.
Okay, so there was some discussion about this one, right? If I remember right, or were we all in consensus with this one? Maybe it was a different one.
I got it. It's been too long since we did this.
Okay, so we talked about this, or we got this right. Dangerous animal condition.
Yeah.
If it's unreasonable for them to play that ball for something other than that dangerous animal condition, they're not going to get relief. Same thing, cart path or anything like that else. We have that other reason where it's unreasonable for them to play, they're not going to get relief. Same principle applies there. We talked about this one, a ball moving down is not moved. That is false. The ball, if it does move down, has moved. So if you're grounding your club in some tall grass and you put it behind the ball and the ball moves downwards, it doesn't go back in that same exact spot where it was before. The ball is moved. Okay, four ball match play. So a player improves conditions affecting the stroke to be made by his or her partner, but the action is of no help to the player. What is the ruling? So we thought the player is disqualified, the partner gets no penalty. Actually, the partner is disqualified, but the player gets no penalty.
We don't play football.
We don't do a ton of four ball, that's for sure. And I don't think we do. We don't do any match play four ball. That's not match play though. It's stroke play though, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So in this case here, the player's action is going to cause the partner score to not count, and but the player is not going to get a penalty because the player doesn't benefit from it.
The player that did the moving is the one that gets to.
No, the players whose ball is improved or affected is going to be hit with the penalty. All right. And then we got the rest of them right. We guessed well.
We did well.
Was there? Oh, there was the overhanging one we talked about.
Yeah.
That was because the ball wasn't hold. And the key thing here was it was the next to last hole. So if this happened on the last hole, and we found out before they returned their scorecard, then we could go back and fix that. But because it happened the hole prior, once they teed off on the next hole, they didn't hole out, they're DQ'd. And then for number 9, where we thought that seemed fair, that is the right answer. That the player is going to be disqualified. And then the last one, where we have the player played from a wrong place and committed a serious breach, both cases, regardless, because they played 2 balls, but because the breach was serious in both cases, they're going to be DQ'd. So
Kyle's got those.
Next week we'll get into 5 and 6, and we'll get through as much as we can. We may need to add another session to get through everything, or we might need to go through and figure out what rules. But I'll get in touch with everyone to see how we're going to get through.
It's going to be on Wednesday next week.
It is planned to be on Wednesday next week. We are kind of at the whims of Karen Gable because of exactly. So it's
nice.
right.
We'll look for your email.
If it does change, we'll let you know as soon as possible. But we're continuing planning for Wednesdays going forward. The other thing one other thing I wanted to throw out there, if there's anyone that is interested in any volunteer that's interested in leading a discussion about the rules a certain week, if that's something that you're interested in doing, let me know. Yeah. Then, we'd be happy to make it happen. Or if you wanted to take part of it, that'd be fine. If that's something that you want to do, let me know. I know a couple of years ago we did that. I'm not saying it's an opportunity for someone to do it if they'd like to. I'm not saying that.
Helps you learn when
Right.
you got to be the one
Right.
saying this is going
So you're
on.
saying if somebody's getting tired of listening to you talk,
I wouldn't
they can
believe
talk
me.
in his place, right?
Sure.
So now you got a room full of volunteers.
Right.
This
But
is as bad as my
appreciate everyone coming out.
dissertation
Safe travels
committee.
back. Thanks for your time.
Thank you for
Thanks,
having
Kyle.
us. Don't look it up. You know how we look for it? There's a company.
Thanks, Kyle.
Wintertime, something else that are so that you, it helps with your sleep.
Okay.
Medicare, you're right. I got one.
Do you know if those clubs are on the conforming list of golf clubs? Because you could use
No, they are
the
not.
5-iron, or you could use.
I asked Eric Martin, I asked my pro, and I don't know where he checked it, but he said, no, they're not.
Yeah, I would.
And, yeah,
I can't say with 100% certainty, but I'm 99% sure of that.
yeah,
I got the double hit. I sometimes hit that one better than I hit my driver.
yeah,
I would.
You could actually use like. a
yeah.
5-iron.
And they, yeah, yeah, you can,
Oh, yeah, it's all.
Right.
Take that out all the time.
yeah.
Right. Yeah, I would. I'm 99% certain of that.
I wouldn't expect that you wouldn't be able to use that gun.
Right.
During a round of work.
Right. Right.
And then the homeless guy come up. Hey, did you see that? And he says, "Oh, I believe him." You didn't see it.
Okay.
Well, yeah.
That would also be a club you would not be able to use as a practice league while carrying around. Because it helps. That's the theory.
Kyle, could I buy a big book loan book from you?
Yeah. Yep.
How much?
It's $20.
$20
Oh, for the big?
for the big.
Yeah, we'll get you get two for the price of one.
Yeah, you get
You get
the,
this and this one for 20.
that one, yeah. That one you get for nothing, the big one you can pay $20.
Yeah, I'm trying to get.
I know,
convince
I
them
know,
it's a
you're
deal.
doing well.
Doing well trying to get me for.
Let me go get you one here really quick.
I can walk that way.
Okay. Sorry?
You better not be accepting any job until this end of this year. I don't want you. Never mind.
You can't leave.
I'm not planning on leaving. So.
But you're. Is
Oh,
Huh? I believe I know he's here today, but he may
He's
be
not a
looking at
government employee.
offices. So
He's trying to tell me how many steaks he wants.
yeah, I think he probably should be back by now. Yeah.
No, we go stop there.
He wants some.
We're doing what we're gonna do next month.
I gotta go get the grant. I gotta
Sorry?
go to the grant.
5 and 6.
All right, forget that. No, I can have one.
I just got back with mine from Disney for 7 days.
Is that how you lost all your hair?
Oh, yeah, I'll tell you.
Oh, you must be tired.
No, but the bride and my daughter were great.
so you gonna do a class?
We get to about 2 o'clock and they say, well, aren't you gonna go play golf?
click the computer for Kyle?
I just got back from playing golf down in Florida for 8 days.
Oh, God, I'll tell you, I got back on Sunday,
How
but man,
about
what a
we
change in
invent-
temperature.
Oh, yeah.
Saturday was 85 and I was playing Magnolia. And I got back here, it was 13 with a wind chill factor or whatever.
Those are the ones I play.
Okay, good work.
Yep. Thank you. We'll see you
Okay, I
next week.
played reunion.
Right?
I did play Bay Hill.
Well, I'm having.